The oldest burial record in human history is not a tomb. It is a silence. And that silence appears exactly 3 times in Scripture, carved into the text like a wound that was never allowed to heal, in the precise spots where the record of a death should have been written and was not. Every patriarch in Genesis dies on the page. The text gives you the age, the circumstances, and in most cases, the descendants who carried the body to its resting place. This was not careless record-keeping. The Hebrew culture that produced these writings understood burial as one of the most sacred responsibilities that could exist between one human being and another. Abraham negotiated at length, in public, before witnesses, to purchase a burial cave for Sarah. Jacob refused to die without extracting a sworn oath from his son that his body would be returned to Canaan. Joseph, knowing he would not live to see it, left explicit instructions that his bones be carried out of Egypt centuries after his death. These people took dying seriously. So when 3 men, 3 specific, named historically documented men, arrive at the point in the text where death should be recorded, and the record produces nothing but a gap, you are not looking at an omission. You are looking at a message. Enoch, Elijah, Moses. 3 men. 3 departures that broke every pattern. 3 destinations that the canonical text refuses to name with any precision. 3 mysteries that have sat inside the oldest religious tradition in the Western world for 3,000 years, addressed by commentators, debated by theologians, and never, not once, resolved by the official sources. But there is one ancient document that does not evade the question. One text, suppressed for over 1,000 years, removed from the biblical canon in the 4th century, hidden in the mountain monasteries of Ethiopia while the rest of the world forgot it had ever existed, that steps directly into the silence and fills it with specificity. It names the place, it describes the geography, it explains the reason for the departure, and it reveals what these 3 men are still waiting to accomplish. That document is the Book of Enoch. It was quoted in your New Testament. It was read in the synagogues. It was treated as authoritative scripture by the disciples of Jesus and the earliest church fathers. And then it was quietly removed. What you are about to hear is what they did not want you to find in its pages. If this investigation reaches you at the moment when it needs to, subscribe to this channel before we go further. What follows cannot be found in a seminary classroom or a Sunday homily. This channel exists to open the archives that others have kept closed. Subscribe now and you will not miss a single door that we unlock together. To understand where these 3 men went, you must first understand what kind of document is claiming to know. The Book of Enoch is not a peripheral curiosity produced by a forgotten sect. It is not Gnostic. It is not late. It is not the product of a fringe tradition that the mainstream rightly dismissed. The evidence for its age, its authority, and its widespread acceptance in the ancient world is overwhelming and is not seriously disputed by serious scholars. The Apostle Jude quoted it by name. In his New Testament letter, a specific prophecy attributed to Enoch the 7th from Adam is reproduced almost word for word. This is not an allusion. It is not a loose thematic echo. It is a direct quotation, presented as the authoritative words of a prophet embedded in a document that Christianity accepted as canonical without hesitation. Tertullian argued at length that it was Scripture and should be treated as such. Clement of Alexandria referenced it. Origen engaged with it seriously. The community at Qumran, the group responsible for preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls, kept more copies of the Book of Enoch than of any other text except the Psalms and Deuteronomy. 11 separate manuscript fragments were found in the caves at Qumran. 11. For comparison, only 1 fragmentary copy of Daniel was found there. The people closest to the time of Jesus considered the Book of Enoch essential reading, and then the 4th century councils excluded it. The official reasons were theological, questions of authorship, concerns about its cosmological framework, its description of the Watchers and the Nephilim. But the exclusion had a practical effect that went beyond theology. It disappeared, not burned in a single dramatic event, not the victim of one decree. It simply ceased to be copied in the libraries that controlled what survived. For over 1,000 years, the complete text was unavailable to Western readers. The fragments embedded in other documents were enough to know that something significant had been removed. But the whole thing, the complete, preserved, unaltered text, gone. Until 1773, when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 complete manuscripts written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian Church had never expelled this book from their canon. They had copied it, read it, treated it as scripture for 15 centuries, while the councils of Rome and Constantinople were deciding it did not exist. When those manuscripts were first translated, scholars encountered something that did not behave like other ancient religious texts. It behaved like a report, not a vision in the abstract devotional sense that fills most prophetic literature, not a dream sequence requiring allegorical interpretation. Enoch does not see a wheel within a wheel and struggle to describe something his vocabulary cannot contain. He travels. He is escorted through specific regions of a specific architecture. He observes what is there. He is shown what it means. And he writes it down with the precision of a man who went somewhere and came back. That report is what we are about to read. The first section of the archive opens with a crisis that predates Moses, predates Abraham, predates every civilization that Western history considers foundational. The Watchers have fallen. In Genesis 6, the canonical text gives you 4 verses, famously compressed, famously contested. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them as wives. Giants were born. The wickedness of the earth became so severe that God decided to destroy everything and start again. 4 verses. For an event of cosmic magnitude. The book of Enoch takes 200 chapters to describe the same event. According to the Enochian account, the Watchers were angelic beings whose function was exactly what their name implies, to observe and guard. They were stationed near the earth as a kind of boundary layer between the divine and the mortal, and 200 of them chose to cross that boundary. They descended on Mount Hermon, a location the text specifies with geographic precision, and swore an oath to each other. The oath was necessary because what they planned was understood, even by them, to be a violation. They knew it was wrong. They made each other accountable to it precisely because they knew they would not do it alone. They took human wives. They taught human beings things that were not meant to be known yet: metalworking, the forging of weapons, astrology, enchantments, the manipulation of the physical world through knowledge that was supposed to arrive through a different path and at a different time, and they produced children. The Nephilim of Genesis are, in the book of Enoch, described with extraordinary specificity. Their height, their appetites, the way they exhausted the resources of the natural world and then turned on the creatures that remained, and then turned on each other. The earth was not simply wicked in the moral sense that conventional readings imply. The earth was structurally broken. The Nephilim were consuming reality faster than it could sustain itself. The cries of the earth, described in the text as literal sound, rising like a voice, reached the highest heaven. And 4 archangels were dispatched to respond. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel, the leader of the Watchers, the one who had taught humanity the most dangerous forbidden arts, and imprison him in a desert called Dudael, to wait there until the day of judgment. Gabriel was sent to incite the Nephilim against each other so that they would destroy themselves through the violence that was already their nature. Michael was sent to bind the remaining Watchers and force them to witness the destruction of their offspring before their own sentence was carried out. And the entire operation required a human intermediary, someone who still had access to both sides of the boundary the Watchers had violated. That intermediary was Enoch. He was not simply a holy man translated to paradise because of his righteousness. He was an emissary. He was needed for an active assignment. The watchers, imprisoned but not silenced, sent a petition upward. They wrote an appeal to the throne, requesting mercy, requesting that the judgment against them be reconsidered. But they had no access to the higher courts of the divine architecture. Their petition would never arrive through any channel available to them. So they looked toward earth, toward the one man who walked between both worlds. They chose Enoch. Enoch took the petition. He read it in full. He sat by the waters of Dan at the sources of the Jordan River, another geographic coordinate, another specific location in a text that refuses to be purely metaphorical, and fell into a vision. The clouds called to him. The winds lifted him from the earth. He was carried through the heavens. What Enoch describes of that transit reads like nothing else in ancient literature. He passes through a wall of crystal. He enters a house built of crystal surrounded by fire, where the floor is fire and the ceiling is fire, and the sight of it produces in him a terror so complete that he falls on his face and cannot move. He is raised. He enters a second structure, larger, more luminous, so filled with a presence he cannot name that he falls again and cannot speak until permitted. Then the answer comes, "Go. Tell the watchers who left the high heaven and the holy eternal place, you will never have peace, not mercy, not revision, not reconsideration." The sentence stands. The watchers will remain imprisoned until the great judgment, and afterward there is nothing for them in any of the places Enoch has seen. He carries this answer back. He delivers it. He watches the reaction of beings whose power and age exceed anything the human world contains. And at the moment his assignment is complete, the text shifts, because Enoch is not returned to earth. Chapters 70 and 71 describe what scholars call the translation of Enoch, the moment when the man who delivered heaven's verdict to imprisoned angels is himself taken into the structure he had been traveling through as a visitor. He is lifted by Michael. He passes through the layered heavens, not a single undifferentiated afterlife, but a stratified architecture with distinct regions, distinct atmospheres, distinct populations. He is brought to a place the text calls the Garden of Righteousness. Read that carefully. The text is deliberate about what it is not calling this place. It is not Eden. It is adjacent to where Eden is in the Enochian cosmological map, near the mountain of God, near the tree of wisdom, at the intersection of the four rivers of creation. But it is a higher space, existing on the same level as the divine administration rather than the level of the physical earth. The inhabitants are described as the righteous and the holy, those brought through death, or, in Enoch's case, through direct translation, into this intermediate space that is not final judgment and is not the full unveiled presence of the divine. It is a waiting place. And that word, waiting, carries more weight than it might seem to, because the book of Enoch does not describe Enoch's arrival as a retirement. It describes it as a repositioning. Enoch is there to be available, to be held in reserve for an assignment that has not yet arrived, being prepared while the rest of history runs its course below. In the prophetic sections of the book of Enoch dealing with the end of the age, Enoch appears again, not as narrator, but as participant. He was taken alive specifically because death would have ended his availability for that role. Now we reach the second name, Elijah. The account of his departure in 2 Kings is the most visually dramatic exit in all of Scripture: a chariot of fire, horses of fire, a whirlwind, and Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven, who stood alone on Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal and did not blink, is carried up. Elisha watches, tears his clothes, picks up the cloak that falls. The text says nothing about where Elijah went. The prophets who accompanied Elisha that day suggested maybe the Spirit of God set him down on some mountain or in some valley. Elisha permitted a search. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing, which means Elijah is not on any mountain accessible to a search party. He is somewhere else. The New Testament confirms that Elijah remained, active long after that whirlwind took him. At the transfiguration of Jesus, on the mountain in the presence of Peter, James, and John, two figures appear from beyond the visible world and stand in conversation with Jesus. One is Moses, one is Elijah. The disciples are awake. Peter speaks to them. He offers to build 3 shelters, as though the two figures from beyond might need a physical place to stay. They are present. They are identifiable. They are, in some form the text considers real enough to describe as a witnessed encounter still in existence. The book of Enoch does not give Elijah a separate destination from Enoch. It gives them the same one, the garden of righteousness, preserved, available, waiting for the same reason. The role for which they were taken has not yet been performed. Now the third name, Moses. And here the archive becomes most complicated, because Moses is the one case in which the Bible actually records a death. Deuteronomy 34 is explicit. Moses went up from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah. God showed him the land of Canaan he would never enter, the destination he had guided the people toward for 40 years. And Moses died there in the land of Moab, and God buried him in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But no man knows the place of his burial to this day. That final phrase has attracted more commentary than almost any other verse in the Pentateuch because it is so deliberately strange. Burial locations in the ancient world were not simply forgotten. They were maintained, venerated, marked. The tomb of Abraham is identifiable. The bones of Joseph were carried across a desert specifically so they would be buried in a known location. Moses is buried by God in a location so undisclosed that the human world has never found it. Why would God hide the tomb of Moses? The letter of Jude, the same letter that quotes the book of Enoch directly, gives the most startling answer in the canonical text. In verse 9, Jude describes a conflict with no narrative anywhere in the Old Testament. Michael the archangel, contending with the adversary about the body of Moses, dared not bring a railing accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you," Michael the archangel, in a dispute over a corpse. A conflict serious enough that he invokes the highest possible authority rather than simply overwhelming his opponent with force. Why would anyone want the body of a dead man? What would anyone, divine or adversarial, want with the body of a man whose mission was already complete? The book of Enoch provides the framework to understand what Jude assumes you already know. The body of Moses was not supposed to remain dead. The dispute that Michael is engaged in is not over a burial site. It is over a resurrection. Moses was being reclaimed. Now hold 3 threads simultaneously and allow them to arrive at the same point. Thread 1. The book of Enoch describes the garden of righteousness as a place where the preserved, whether through direct translation as with Enoch or through reclamation as with Moses, exist in a state of readiness for a future role. Thread 2. The revelation of John describes 2 witnesses who will appear in the last days. One will have power to shut the sky so that no rain falls during their testimony. One will have power to turn water to blood and strike the earth with every kind of plague. These are not generic apocalyptic figures. The power to shut the sky is the exact signature of Elijah. In 1 Kings, he pronounced a drought that lasted 3.5 years, the same period the Revelation account assigns to the 2 witnesses. The power to turn water to blood is the exact signature of Moses. The 10 plagues of Egypt. The Nile turned red. The acts that defined his entire ministry. The Jewish tradition, from its earliest centuries, identified these 2 witnesses as Elijah and Moses. This was the dominant interpretation, the one the disciples of Jesus operated within when they asked him about Elijah coming before the great and terrible day. Thread 3. The book of Enoch, in its sections on the Great Judgment, describes a moment when the preserved ones, those held in the garden of righteousness, are released into the world again to perform their final function before the age closes. Elijah and Moses are not simply historical figures with remarkable exits. They are instruments held in reserve. And Enoch, the man who delivered the verdict of condemnation to the imprisoned watchers, the man who was shown the entire architecture of what exists above and below and around the visible world, is described in some streams of the ancient tradition as the third witness. The one who saw the original crime, the one who can speak to the original judgment, the man who delivered the sentence to the watchers at the beginning of this age may return to watch it executed at the end. 3 men who never died, 3 departures without graves. 3 figures who appear together on a mountain in the middle of the New Testament in a moment the Gospel writers treat not as a dream, but as a witnessed historical event. They were not removed from history. They were placed in position. The final page of this archive is the one that does not stay in the past. If the framework of the Book of Enoch is taken seriously, and the evidence for taking it seriously is more substantial than most people have ever been permitted to know, then what it describes is not a closed story with a settled ending. It is an open account with an outstanding conclusion. The watchers are still imprisoned, according to this framework, waiting for the judgment that was promised but has not yet been executed. And the witness to that original crime, the man who stood at the edge of the abyss and delivered the verdict they appealed and lost, is still in existence, preserved in a place the removed book's readers were never meant to forget. The Garden of Righteousness, adjacent to the mountain of God. At the convergence of the 4 rivers of creation, holding 3 men who walked into history and never walked out of it. The question that sits at the bottom of this investigation is not theological, it is personal. If the architecture described in this document is real, if the Garden of Righteousness is a real location in the structure of existence, if the preserved ones are held there for a real purpose that has not yet arrived, then what you know about the world is smaller than what the world actually contains. And what you know about death is smaller than what death actually means. The Book of Enoch survived, not because a council decided to preserve it, because the mountains of Ethiopia held it while the councils forgot it existed. Because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church treated it as sacred when the churches of Rome and Constantinople decided it was too inconvenient to keep, and now it is open again. The document they buried is in your hands. What Enoch saw, the destinations, the architecture, the prisoners, the garden, the waiting figures, he wrote it all down. And the council that removed his book from the canon did not destroy those pages. They only delayed the moment when you would read them. That moment is now. If this investigation opens something in you, like this video so that others can find it. Subscribe to this channel because this is only the beginning of what the suppressed texts contain. Every week we open another file. Every week we step into another silence in the official record and ask what was placed there before the silence was imposed. The archive is deep, and we have only opened the first door.